grow great kids. So what does it mean to grow? You know, if you grow anything, you're nurturing, you're fertilizing, you're watering, you're pruning. It's an active experience to grow something. It's not, it doesn't just happen. Well, I suppose it can to some degree, but if we don't nurture that growth, we get random plants, if you will. So it's about nurturing. How can we influence the growth of our children by nurturing them? Secondly, great. Our kids are great. They're talented. They're intelligent. They are incredible human beings. Go back to that 100 billion neurons times 10,000 different connections. The capacity of our kids' brains is tremendous. And they are so cute when they're babies, right? But we start to see that intelligence grow very quickly. We see that unique person that they are. So they are potential leaders of our world. And it's only, the potential is there if we nurture it, if we help to grow it. And they're kids. They're young sponges just wanting to know how to live life well. They want to learn. There isn't a child I've ever experienced that doesn't want to learn. They do, and we just have to nurture that. So growing great kids to me is just such a deeper meaning than a simple title that might sound cool. It's really about growing them. How do we help do that? So with that said, this is our agenda. We're going to do a quick summary of the past 2 webinars, and there's just 2 slides for each for those summaries to try to get us back, especially if you're brand new, get some understanding of what we've said. But those past 2 webinars really do build toward what we're going to talk about today, which is the nurturing of habits of mind and how our lives change when our habits change. So let's move forward. We've got 3 topics we're going to hit after we do our summary. So let's hit the summary number 1. This is our first webinar. And if you recall, if you would do it with me, please, because, hey, I'm a teacher and I expect my class to participate. When I do some of these hand exercises, not only does it help me to remember, but it gives us a visual that makes a lot more sense. So if you will, both hands up, thumbs in, fingers over, hands together. That's your brain. And frankly, it's about that size too, about 3 pounds, 2 brains, left and right hemisphere. And then the 3 main components that we went over in the first episode were, if we just use one hand, if I open that up, we've got the brain stem, which would be my wrist. The thumb is my limbic system. And these 4 fingers are the 4 lobes of the brain, or the cerebrum. So brainstem, survival function. Okay, am I warm? Am I comfortable? Was I fed? Am I safe? And once that's satisfied, then I go to the limbic system. And we talked about the use of understanding feelings using the Kimochi chart, but understanding that a child's feelings come next. How do I feel? And that's in our limbic system. And if we don't address that, if we don't address safety, etc., we don't address emotions, we never get to the cerebrum of the brain, which is where we do all of our thinking. Simple way to think about that too is my thinking can be heart thinking, mind thinking, body thinking, and soul thinking. So heart, mind, body, and soul are full thinking, understanding the whole child, heart, mind, body, and soul. Got it good? 2 hemispheres, right? So those 2 hemispheres, what we've been trying to do is understand half of the story is the learner, who that learner is, heart, mind, body, and soul. The other half of the story is learning. And we take that whole brain, 100 billion neurons. So we looked at the neuron, we even used our arm to describe the cell body, the dendrites, the axon, the myelin sheath, and the synaptic terminals to understand really what goes on chemically and electronically in a neuron. And we're trying to create action. We're trying to create energy for our kids to be excited about learning in a very healthy, productive, constructive way. So we don't want toxic brains. We want energetic, lively, healthy brains. And that's the neuron. And then the learning process. We've been spending most of our time talking about the number 1 element of, or the foundation to learning, and that's a child's disposition to learn. And that's where we went in the second episode. We introduced the formation of learning, which is that diagram you see on the right. The bottom of it, or the base of it, is their disposition to learn. I'm going to show you these discs again. So the foundation to learning is our disposition. Another way to say that is our attitude and our perception about learning and about who we are as learners. If I feel like, believe that I am a good learner, then my disposition is strong. Once we have a decent disposition, we can acquire knowledge. We can gather new knowledge, integrate it into what's already in our brain, and become more knowledgeable. Secondly, and by the way, if we stop there, we only retain 10% after 2 weeks, that's not a very good number. But unfortunately, go back to your college classes, and too often, that's what happened. After 2 weeks after taking that test, we kind of forgot a lot of the stuff we studied. But if we take it to a reasoning level, we extend and refine the knowledge, then we are going to have a 50% retention. But the cat's meow, if you will, is creativity. When we get our kids fully engaged in doing meaningful exercises in school by decision-making, problem-solving, invention, investigation, etc., we get 90% retention. Many of us call this project-based learning. At our school, we call it service project-based learning. So having a real-life event or artifact, performance, or product to build creates that level of retention. And that just goes right back to disposition, because that was so cool. I want to do it again. So my disposition about learning and being a learner is even more powerful, and I'll cycle through this much more efficiently and effectively. So that's the formation of learning process in a very simple diagram. Let me move on to the next slide, which is summary of episode 2. So if that's the learning process, I need to understand my learner, and my learner has a unique disposition to learn. And that's based on very unique qualities of who we are as a learner. I know I'm much more of a visual learner than I am an auditory or kinesthetic learner. Knowing that about myself, I take notes differently. I study differently. I make sure that I have visual, and that's why I do a lot of this. I need the visuals in order to retain those things in my brain. So we used an eye movement technique to try to identify learning modalities. If you didn't get to see that, go back to that episode. It's pretty cool. So learning modalities, I'm a visual, auditory, kinesthetic learner. Maybe we can add the tactile and the olfactory sense as well under kinesthetic. But generally, there are 3 primary learning modalities: visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. What is yours? What is your child's? Knowing that is very powerful as a parent and as a teacher. But more powerful is the child knowing it themselves. If they understand how they learn, they're going to be able to use that when they're struggling, especially when they're struggling. So to affirm that is critical. Secondly, we looked at temperament, and we used a set of kite cards, is what we call them here. This series of 4 cards, temperament cards, essentially, to create a kite. And the image you see there in the middle on the bottom is as a student's kite. So in that particular case, that student is the dominant red thinker, and that red thinker is going to ask where and how first. That's their first question. Their next question is going to be the green question, which is why. So where and how, then why. Then they're going to the blue question, and I hope you can see that I'm basing this on the shape of that kite, the shape of that diagram, directs me to the child thinking who. That's the blue question. And then finally, where and how. But guess which color is most desired and expected in school? This one. So if that's my kite, I don't think I'm very smart because I'm not thinking like this first. So understanding your child's temperament is essential. There are many different ways to do that. This is one of them. But just, we all know that our kids are different. I have now 4 grandchildren, and just, you know, they're babies. They're not 0, they're 8 months to 6 years old. And it's so clear that their temperament is unique to them, and understanding that and having compassion as well as compassion and affirmation of it gives me a good understanding of how to communicate with that child. So temperament. And then finally, intelligence. We know that how we're smart, to me, trumps how smart I am. That's what makes me smart, is how I'm smart, not how smart I am. I know it sounds a little goofy, but we all too often think about, or we ask the question, how smart is that child? Well, in school, we base that on reading and math. Well, what if that's not their greatest intelligence? What if music is, or graphic design, or athletics, or dance? All of those other things are equally valuable in our society. And if we don't affirm that, if we don't honor the intelligence of our children, they will become reluctant learners. They won't think they're smart. So understanding it is essential for us as parents and teachers to understand our children's learning modalities, their temperament, and their intelligences. And the more tuned in we can get to that, the better. But like I said earlier, what's most important is that child's sense of personal efficacy. They know how they're smart. They know how they learn. They know how they think in the questions that come to their mind first, because that just makes them an independent learner. They'll be smart beyond school. So that's why we spent that time looking at the brain and understanding the components of the brain, but also understanding a bit deeper the process of learning and the uniqueness of each learner. All can be summed up in your two fists right there.
Bob, thank you. Can I just have to make a comment, because since last webinar that we held, I have my 3 boys, and my 10-year-old and my 8-year-old, they're just going about how they're taught, the math and the reading and everything like that in school, and everything comes very easy to them. And then I have my little guy, Emmett, in kindergarten, and the letters and the sight words and the alphabet and the math, it's just not natural to him. But he is the kid that will come and bake with me and figure out measurements and make experiments, and he has the most interesting thoughts and ideas about life that you would not expect coming from a 6-year-old. But I've been concerned because the teachers have had conversations with him. We need to help Emmett be supported more with his sight words and his reading and to understand the concept. And as a parent, of course, when you never experienced that before, you get very worried. But after hearing about, especially the kites and understanding his kite, I have calmed down as a mom, and I feel like I'm finding ways to support him and make it easier for him to learn.
And that's such a beautiful message you just sent to Emmett. By you being calm and you honoring and affirming him for who he is and not judging him for who he is, what does that do to your disposition and your heart and your mind? You're going to, okay, time out. Mom understands. She believes. Boy, if mom understands and believes, there's something there, and I then can believe in myself.
Yeah, good.
The messages we give to our kids is so powerful. It's extremely powerful. If you tell a child or help them to recognize the truth of how they're smart, and they understand that, they say, oh my gosh, well, yeah, my gosh, I love animals. I'm so good with animals, or I'm so good with baking, or whatever it is. Then they're going to believe that they're smart. That's that efficacy word. I believe that I can make an effect on my life and the lives of other people. That's efficacy, and we want that for every child. And if we can build that in children, we won't have the problems that we have with too many of us as adults, because we will grow up with a sense of efficacy and believe and be more creative and productive citizens.
That's so true. Thanks. You, Bob.
Thank you, Lynn, for sharing that. All right, so let's start talking about habits of mind. And if you've been in the education world, you've heard this term for maybe 10 to 20 years even. And we've seen a lot of literature come out and research about habits of mind, and it has stuck. More than any other thing, I think the idea of habits of mind is something that has stuck in education, because it really is the essence of good teaching and learning. But let's just go back a little bit and talk about what is a habit. And if I were to ask you as parents and educators, what habits would you hope to see in your children? So let's take a minute right now and kind of gather some ideas. So would you please chime in the chat box and give us a word or a phrase of a habit that you want or believe your children need in order to be successful learners, citizens, people. So let's take a minute there and chime in, all right? And I don't see your chiming, so.
All right, so yes, independent, We have curiosity. We have good listeners, endurance. There's a lot of them coming in. Respect, being respectful, staying present, being in the moment.
Two more. Come on out there, two more.
All right, honesty is another one. I'm just reading to focusing on the speaker, the love of learning.
Right.
Accountability. There's a lot of them pouring in right now. Thank you.
You know, I don't know if anybody would argue.
I like that one.
Yeah, those are common thoughts, common expectations for us as parents and educators. And we know when our kids do those things, they become very successful people. And the same is true in business. Now, as a superintendent, principal administrator, I go to a meeting every month and we visit different companies throughout the county. And in each of those cases, we ask the CEO or the managers of those companies, what are the expectations, the behaviors, the traits that you would hope students are coming to your business with? And I've never heard them say a 3.5 GPA. I've never heard them say an SAT score. I've never heard them say to be able to read at grade 15. Yeah, those things are needed, but what they always say is we want people who are going to take initiative. They will put effort into their work. They will persevere. They will ask questions. They will work interdependently with a team. Those are the common things that businesses want. And we want the same thing in the home and the family. And those are habituated. Those are habits that we can build for our children if we explicitly teach them. Just like reading and math, if we don't explicitly teach the multiplication table and show them how that system works, they won't learn it. They will learn some mathematical concept just from life, but they will not learn explicitly how to do some of the algorithms or the calculations that are necessary for mathematics. Well, there are some habits that are necessary for taking initiative. The same with reading. If we don't teach them the sight words, if we don't teach them the phonics, if we don't teach sentence structure and paragraph structure, they're not going to learn it very easily. A lot of it might come natural if they're readers, but you follow what I'm saying. So we need to explicitly teach habits of mind. A couple more thoughts on that. I had just a beautiful experience yesterday in a couple of ways that really made me think about today and what we were talking about. And I'll share my favorite one first, just because it's here in front of me and it's kind of brought a tear to my eye. Actually, let me read the note that came from the kids. So this came from the kindergarten class. And it says, "Hi, Mr. B. Did you know," I can't read backwards, "did you know that the alphabet countdown began yesterday? So today we're celebrating letter B. You are our very favorite B. These are kindergarten pictures and 5th grade words all about you." And they created, I think it's at least 20 feet long, a scrolling poster of the habits and the character traits that they believe Mr. B expresses. So I got this beautiful, beautiful across my office wall from the kids. And what it told me was, number one, they appreciate their principal and that always feels good. But maybe more importantly, that they're thinking about character traits. A leader, what makes somebody an influential person in their life. And they're using the words and the ideas that we've explicitly taught here at school. So they use the word persevere. They use the word manages his impulsivity. Those types of things, they have the vocabulary. And they're kindergartners. So we know we can teach it at a very young age. We can teach this vocabulary to our kids. Another story, every morning, we do a program called Shared Start. And it lasts 10 to 15 minutes at the most. It's the whole school. We meet in the gym and we celebrate kids and we talk about the habit of the week. And teachers bring students up to celebrate those who are really practicing those habits well and have achieved success in them. And our kindergarten teacher actually brought up a student who was her student probably 3 years ago. So she's what, in 4th grade now, 3rd or 4th. And she got a letter from the mom. So she's been at our school for 4 years. And the mom's letter was so beautiful. The mom talked about how the day before her daughter was proactive, one of our habits, and took initiative to take care of a whole bunch of business at home. She prepared lunch for the next day, and she has 2 younger siblings. She helped her mom get her breakfast ready. She got clothes laid out. So just these little simple behaviors. The mom was in tears and wrote a letter to the teacher to let her know how grateful she was that she's received this type of thinking and has that kind of efficacy in her life. I heard it when a teacher brought up 5 students and went over. We used yesterday was celebrating the mind, and talked about the habits that these kids have, whether they're mathematicians or great readers, and the habits they use to get there. So it has become so apparent to all of us that the effort to teach habits is so much more powerful to our thinkers, especially in the long term, than just talking about reading scores or math scores or specific achievements, academic achievements. The thinking achievements trump it big time in my book. It's the cart before the horse. We need to take care of pulling along reading and math by teaching productive habits of mind. Any comment there before I move forward?
No, just a big thank you for sharing those stories. Those are wonderful.
Yeah, a pleasure. It was just so delightful to hear that language come out of kids. My granddaughter said, Daddy wasn't managing his impulsivity this weekend. And I just thought, oh man, my son's going to tell me about that.
That's great.
Teaching her that. Okay, very good. Let me see if there was any other note. Oh, I wanted to read a quote. Horace Mann said this, and if you're an educator, you know the name Horace Mann as a great founder in education. He said, habits or habit is a cable. We weave a thread of it each day, and at last we cannot break it. Habit is something we weave each day, and when we've done it long enough, we can't break it. So let me use an illustration to describe that. I'm one to use yarn often, and I use yarn in a variety of ways. I can't remember if I did this in the previous episode, but if I take this strand of yarn apart, in almost every case, I found one case where I got some yarn and it didn't have 4 strands. What are those 4 strands? In Mr. B's world, they're heart, mind, body, and soul. So our brain, if we think about this as brain matter, if we're the whole person, we're a whole person, heart, mind, body, and soul. And if I dip into that and pull out one tiny little fiber of that strand, let's call that a neuron. So these neurons are not tied together. They are just lined up together and they create a strand. And the more of them that line up, the stronger it gets. And it creates a neural pathway. This becomes a habit. And if a habit has been stranded together, thought together enough, it's pretty strong. But if I do it over time and I repeat it and teach it, whether it's learning how to throw a baseball, learning how to write my name, tie my shoes, or do the Pythagorean theorem, the more I do it, the stronger that neural pathway gets. So if we think about that in terms of our children's minds, we're trying to habituate particular ideas and thoughts and skills. So it's this over and over. It has to be done over and over. Back to the slide, because there's some numbers here that might be interesting to you. If you look at the research on learning, it takes 3 to 20 times to learn anything. So if you meet somebody and you say, hi, my name is Bob, and it's nice to meet you, and they tell you their name is Jim, and 2 minutes later you go, oh, what was that person's name? It happens to all of us all the time. But if you said, oh, hey, Jim, it's nice to meet you. I'll be goofy. Do you spell it J-I-M or G-Y-M? you're not going to forget that name because you've reiterated it into your brain in a couple of different ways, at least 3 times. And then if you use it again in the conversation, you'll be able to say, hey, Jim, it was great to meet you. I'll see you later. But if we don't do something over and over, then it's not gonna stick. Some of the great work from John Medina, and Brain, I think he calls it Brain Works, but his work on repetition is critical. And we know as educators that we just need to repeat things. So the habituation of this idea, if we send the information home, if the parents get the habit of the week, if the parents are getting that habit in the teacher's newsletter, if the students are using that in their writing, in their language, they're habituating, creating that neural pathway. We know that for most habits, whether there are eating habits, our sleeping habits, etc., it takes 20 or more times to actually habituate a practice or a behavior. So this aligns to that. The unfortunate thing is that last comment I made there, and many people don't know this, but if we learn something well and we habituate it and it's wrong, take somebody's name, for example. If you learn somebody's name or you think you learn somebody's name and it's wrong and you use it, to change that is very difficult. It's a lot harder to unlearn something than it is to learn something. And the research tells us it's up to 30 to 60 times to unlearn something. So again, children, growing children, if we can do this early, if we can habituate these types of thoughts, then they will stick and they'll keep those, as opposed to having to unlearn an idea. I know for me, I had to unlearn the idea that I wasn't smart. As a child, I didn't have the efficacy. I didn't have the reading skills, and I didn't think I was capable. But when I learned that I was a visual learner and I had some strong coaching from family and from friends, I learned, oh my gosh, I can do this. I can learn. I can study. I can write. And, you know, because of that sense of efficacy, I've been able to do the things I really want to do. So habits of mind are the habit, the idea of habituation is essential to what we're doing. Don't think that, you know, I told them once, I told them twice, I told them 3 times, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted now. Well, how long does it take to learn something? How many times? If you haven't spent the time and helped the child to learn 3 to 20 times, then we shouldn't expect them to learn it. Now, if we've done the same thing over and over again after 20 times and it's still not working, we call that insanity, right? We've got to change our way. We've got to change the mode that we're learning. We have to look at the temperament or the intelligence and use their strength to stretch their struggle. So if something's not working, time out, stop, change the mode, change the temperament question, change the intelligence approach. And if we do that, then we're going to change the learning. Knowing what theirs is brilliant. If you know a child's temperament, intelligence, modality, wow. And pretty soon that child's going to say, time out. Let me try it this way because I know if I do it this way, I might catch it faster. And if we use multiple modalities and intelligences, et cetera, in the classroom, then we're going to hit all of our kids. They won't be sliding off the scale and missing something. Super. All right. I think I'm ready to go on to our next topic. Any questions so far? I'm going to check my watch because I talk too much. Yes, I do. So E plus R equals O is a simple equation. I think that's super powerful and easy to hang on your refrigerator or in your classroom. And it comes from both Stephen Covey and Jack Canfield. I've kind of taken both of their thoughts and put them into a simple way to express this to kids. An event happens, something happens, my response ability will end up changing the outcome. So here's a simple math idea to look at this and understand it. If a -2 thing happens to me and I add a -2 to it, what do I get? I just doubled the negative. So helping our kids to understand that your responsibility is critical, whether it's positive or negative. And if we can habituate strong positive responses, productive habits, then we're going to get better outcomes. But what if I had the same negative thing happen to me and I added 0? It's still a -2, but I'm not responsible for it. It wasn't my influence that made it negative. And that's a nice neutral way to be. What if it's a -2 and I add a +2? Now things start to change. We neutralize the problem, helping a child to recognize if you use a positive habit here, then you are going to create a positive situation, or at least nullify all of the. Importantly, if we can turn negatives into positives, we have to add 4. We have to add a order to get the positive outcome. And we know that negatives can turn into positives all the time in life. It's how we respond. And what a respond is my responsibility. If I have the ability to do it, and I have the thinking skills, then I should be held accountable to, but I have to be taught. I have to be taught what my ability is, or what the abilities are to in order to change a response. So I want to use this simple equation to get us started. There's one more slide on this, and that is kind of the key, or the simplest way to look at this is if we pause before we respond, and parents, you know what I'm talking about. Pause before you respond. Take that deep breath, take 3 seconds, whatever it is you need, and think positively. You'll be putting on the positivity button. That's a goofy Mr. B-ism. But that pause button is where we have our power. If we can just click the pause button at time, how should I do this? What's the next right thing for me to do? Then I'm going to have a much more positive response. And Stephen Covey did a nice job of identifying the brain structures or the thinking skills that we have available, and he put them into 4. So if we could look at these 4, the first is that I have self-awareness. I know who I am. I know my temperament. I know how I might react. Again, it goes back to understanding how I think. Number 2 is I have free will. I have the freedom to choose to my response. Nobody forces my responses. I choose those, or I react. My habituation is based on my reaction. Number 3 is I have an imagination. UCLA did a beautiful study about decision making and how many responses do we have to any one decision. And they identified that we have an average of 500. So we have plenty of choices. We don't have to do it the way our parents did it. We don't have to do it the way our friend does it. We can use our creative mind and come up with many other ways to solve a problem or make a decision. Finally, we have a conscience. I've not run across a child where when I asked what is the next right thing to do, they didn't tell me the right answer. They didn't tell me an answer that wasn't positive. They didn't tell me a negative answer. They would say, I ought to. And so we have a conscience and we know what's good, true, and right. So teaching this to children, E plus R equals O in its simplest form, you can just say, hey, what's your responsibility? And leave it there. And I'll guarantee most of the time, they'll give you the right response. Got it good? All right, so that's a structure, okay? A structure of thinking, E plus R equals O. Now I want to test you, not test you, but give you a little exercise right now in your brain to experience what it means to have structures to solving problems. When I have a habit that I can employ in a situation, then I'm going to be smarter. So this has 54 numbers on it. I'd like you to take about 10 seconds to see how many numbers you can count, counting one in consecutive order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, up to 54. On your mark, set, go. Two and 1. All right, you probably got to 15, maybe 16 or 17, somewhere in there. Let's now change it a little bit. I'll leave the same numbers there, but let's add a structure to it. Go ahead. What if we put these in these boxes and we understand that they're in consecutive order, 1, 2, 3 across the top. The next row is 4, 5, and 6. And now count and see how far you can get. On your mark, set, go. And stop. I bet you got a lot farther. When you know there's a system, it makes it easy. and it makes you think and feel and act smart. You're able to accomplish a lot more when you have a system in place. That's what our habits are. They're systems. They're systems thinking. They're ways for us to practice an intellect or an intelligence, a cognitive process that will help us resolve something. So I hope you felt that. I hope you went, oh my gosh, wow, what a difference. Instead of randomly trying to find these answers, there was a system in place that made it a lot easier. And having a system. So when I'm struggling, I'm a kinesthetic learner, and I think I need to manage my impulsivity. What tools do I have? And I use that term, I'm going to manage my impulsivity. And what we say is just get a grip on it. Get a grip on that limbic system. Then all of a sudden I slow down, I pause, and I have a good response. All right, let's move forward. We've got two sets of habits that have been published out there in history that I think are exceptional. One of them I read 25 years ago. Many of you probably did too, and that was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. The other favorite authors is Matthew Kelly, and he quoted this: our lives change when our habits change. If we don't change habits, we won't change much. A quick illustration on my hands that the kids came up with, the middle school kids did, to try to remember the 7 habits. So if you go to the next slide. He uses this beautiful tree to describe it. And the roots of the tree are our personal habits. Those are the things that we can build and have internally. The structure of the tree are social habits or public habits. And then finally, there's a habit on the top called sharpening the saw, which interestingly is sharpening your saw, heart, mind, body, and soul. So the first habit is to be, that's the letter B, proactive. So that's the symbol the kids use, is be proactive. So I can even walk into a class and say, not say a word, just use be proactive. I can use the next one, same way as a parent or as a teacher, which is to begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind. Now, as I'm saying these, remember what we said at the very beginning. People use these ideas, and we can take, maybe we would have come up with 100 ideas had we left it up for a while, but they can be summarized into these 7 or these next 16 that I'm going to show you. So where are we? Be proactive, begin with the end in mind, put first things first. First. Put first things first. He wrote another book just on that, first things first. So putting your values straight and making those your big yeses so you can say no to so many other things is putting first things first. So those are 3 personal victories, personal habits. The next 3 are public habits, and those include seeking first to, think win-win is first. So think win-win. That's thinking about another person. I need to win, they need to win. Instead of a win-lose or a lose-win, we want a win-win. That's a public victory. That's a public relational victory. The second one, probably maybe the most important to us and our families, is to seek first, to understand, then be understood. So yes, I need to listen and affirm what somebody's telling me, but I also need to share my own opinion. So seek first to understand and then be understood. The next one is synergize. This is kind of a cool one. 1 + 1 = 4. We both win more when we work together. So the concept of synergy is us working together, we create more. So 1 + 1 = 4 or more. And then finally, the sharpen the saw. Sharpen the saw, here's our saw, heart, mind, body, and soul. And we're going to sharpen it regularly because we're going to take care of our heart. We're going to enter, or we're going to have carefree timelessness with our friends. We are going to have good sleep, diet, and exercise. We are going to read good books. And we're going to find the classroom of silence to fulfill our soul. So sharpening the saw is that effort we put into every week to try to improve ourselves, heart, mind, body, and soul. So those are the 7 habits of highly effective people. There's a Leader in Me program that schools can adopt, which we did. And it gives us the curriculum, a lot of the tools we need for our parents to teach these 7 habits across the board. Whew, I'm talking fast. I am, aren't I? Okay, next one, next slide. So that's one set of habits, and I think just those habits alone implemented into a school and communication with the family is great. We actually started with Art Costa and Benicallic's 16 Habits of Mind. So considering the habits of mind, they did a little more intellectual work on the things that make us smart intellectually. And I'll just ramble through a few of them because we've said a number of them. I'll just pick number 9. How about number 9? Number 9 is thinking and communicating with clarity and precision. All I have to do with children sometimes is say, hey, time out. Speak or communicate with clarity and precision. If I say it with a friendly smile, I'm going to get that student to stop and speak more clearly, maybe use better vocabulary, get the word at out of the vocabulary or like, and get them to speak with clarity and precision. So instead of saying don't do this or don't do that, we're saying do these. Use a proactive, positive language. Well, what should I do then? Give me the thing to fill the vacuum if I take this out of my vocabulary or my thinking. How about number 7, questioning and posing problems? Did you question? Did you ask your teacher? Did you ask your friend? Listening with understanding and empathy goes back to one of the 7 habits. I think probably the favorite is managing impulsivity or finding humor. My gosh, finding humor is a soulful thinking skill. If I take a situation and I find humor, then, oh my gosh, I'm just de-escalating any problems and trying to find the humor in it. So it's a choice. It's a decision, but I need a tool to do it. I need the vocabulary and I need the practice. I need to habituate it, and I'm only going to practice it if I hear it enough. I hear it at home, I hear it at school, I hear it in my classroom, I hear it outside. Hear that, the more it is a tool that I can employ. And more importantly, it's a positive, productive tool. It's not that don't do this and stop doing that. It's do this. It's what we ought to do instead of what we ought not to do. And I think that's huge because instead of saying don't, we say do. It takes away the no and puts in the yes. Hope that made sense. Okay, moving forward. How do we integrate this into the school? We have a calendar and we teach each of these habits each week. You can go back to that school-wide integration as a summary. So we put it into our calendar every week. The teachers do, I do on my weekly posts that I send to parents. It's calendared. So we are all focusing on this habit this week and we're celebrating this habit this week just to reiterate it, teach it, give examples to everybody. It's integrated into our unit. So when teachers design a unit of study, we're asking them what habits are you going to explicitly teach in this unit of study? Our classes each have a morning meeting. So part of our social emotional learning programs, this becomes the topic for the morning meeting is how do we manage our impulsivity? Or give me examples of how you found humor. So it's a way to converse and get that vocabulary built in. Our PBIS system I'll touch in a minute, but probably the most powerful one, getting it home and integrating it at home, has been through Parent Square and having parents learn about the habit each week. So I give a little bit of a blurb on what it is, and then I provide links to families on how to practice that habit. They're either video links or reading links. And then I teach, how do I do that heart, mind, body, and soul? So if you're interested in seeing those posts, I think Anu can make those available to you. But that gives us a direct understanding about the habit and how to incorporate it into our family. So that concept of ubiquitous messaging, it has to be. If these are going to get built in just like anything else, it needs to be ubiquitous. It needs to go throughout everything that we do. It becomes the values that we believe in, and when we have values to believe in, then we make decisions and solve problems based on those values. Next slide is an image of, we talked about positive PBIS systems, positive behavior interventions and support. And when I thought about our system and how are we going to direct kids to being trustworthy, respectful, responsible, fair, and caring citizens, again, 5 things that make one big idea. I'm terrific, trustworthy, respectful, responsible, fair, and caring. That comes from Character Counts. That's a program that a lot of our schools have. I just took the citizenship and said, this is citizenship. If I am these 5 things, I'm a great citizen. So what does a citizen look like at Shared Start, or in the classroom, or in the bathroom, or in the library? And what habits are they practicing if they're doing those things? So our PBIS systems are ways to directly and explicitly express the expectations. And again, the positive expectation, not what not to do, but what to do, and the habit that goes with it. So this is an example. You're welcome to have a copy of that. Just say so. You can either go to my website or to Parent Square website, and we can send that out to you. Whew, I'm checking my watch again because we're about out of time. Lastly is integration of those habits to the heart, mind, body, and soul. My personality is really going to dictate which habits I'm good at and which ones I'm not good at. So this shows or gives you a clue as to what you would expect from some child's kite. Some temperament that a child has will kind of dictate what habits they're good at and which ones they're not, which ones they need to stretch. All right, finally, I think we have a summary slide of these are the 3 ideas that we're trying to promote today or teach. E plus R equals O, event plus response equals outcome. And your responsibility is the key. And your habit is dependent, or your responsibility is dependent upon your habits. And then that habits of mind are intellectual and personal character, because character builds our destiny, as I'll show you in one last slide. And then how do we build it into the systems of support or the school-wide systems? So many different ways you can do it by just building that vocabulary into, one way or another, your school or your home. Finally, I'll leave with you with a quote that we started with when we started this seminar. And it's really kind of boils everything into this one quote. When we sow a thought, when we sow that thought often enough, it becomes our actions. Take anything in life. If you think about it enough, you're likely to act upon it. When we act upon it enough, it habituates. What habituates becomes our character. And our character truly does define our destiny. So that simple quote should be on every fridge, every classroom, because your thinking is what drives your destiny. Get it, got it good? I hope that was helpful today. I know I spoke quickly and we didn't get a lot of conversation in, but I know some of you have something else to do in about 2 minutes. So Lynn, I'll let you close us out.